It's 3:45, so maybe a good moment to ask whether we're still on the same page. And we do that by, Emily and I will do that by looking at what we've learned about how hunters communicate with their organization over data. And picking up on Susanne's point, this is not how data is seen in the environmental science as a communication tool. So I think in that sense, it's breaking interesting new ground for that scene. So data are prevalent in society, but turning into a data society where ICTs are giving it currency and power. And that leads to a situation where data is perceived to be needed for many things. To know in the broader sense of the word, to evidence and to account. And as a result, an increasing number of organizations ask for this kind of information. And as a response, many people give data to these organizations. And we're interested in that transition. And it can have many forms. Some can be part of contracts, things you have to do, think of time recording or tax, handling in your tax declarations. But increasingly, there's also cultures forming around the transition of data, and where people voluntarily provide information to organizations. And their data becomes relational. So that will tell us far more than the data itself. It can also start to break into the processes around data transformation. That is the scene we're interested in. In the environmental realm, this is a very popular situation. An increasing number of environmental actors actively tries to get data from people, and people with specific interests often are keenly providing data. And that leads to this situation where data moves between interest holders, individual people and organizations. And we focus on one such relationship, and that is hunters and their submission of voluntary data to the Svenska Jägareförbundet, the hunters organization dealing with a lot of the hunting in this country. And the questions we ask center around what kind of communication takes place around such data transformation? What are the motivations of hunters and the organization involved? And what is happening with aspects like legitimacy and trust? Just have a quick look at the nature, pun intended, of the data. Who's actually submitting that? Well, about 5,000 reports every year are submitted to the Svenska Jägareförbundet. And these are voluntary submissions. There's also obligatory submissions of moose and red deer, but these are hunters deciding to voluntarily pass on information about what they have shot. This happens across about 30% of Sweden, and the Svenska Jägareförbundet is very keen to increase this surface area, as it were, from where it gets data, and that, of course, then becomes a pull factor to the submission of the data. That data is used by authorities for management purposes, and we try to get a handle on it by having conducted pilot interviews and a survey to which about just over 2,000 hunters replied. And if we look at who submits, and this is mostly digital, but not exclusively, it's clear the leaders of the team that do this. And they often are responsible for a small team of hunters, 6 to 20 people on average. And they're very experienced members. They have, on average, at least 82% of our submitters indicate that they have more than 20 years of hunting experience. They're typically a member of the Svenska Jägareförbundet. They are involved in moose hunting, which they have to provide data on by law. And they have a very strong sense of duty. So this business of moving data, getting data from your fellow hunters and then passing it on to the organization is something they see as part of their voluntary job. And this data becomes very clear from the survey is seen as important and as something that underpins part of management, which they see as key. And it involves all sorts of different species, and particularly roe deer and wild boar, but also all sorts of smaller creatures turn up. And then move over to Emily.
Yes. So I will dig a little bit more into our findings so far. And here we have drawn a lot on theory from psychology. So we have been looking at, for example, motivation. So that's the motivation then for hunters to report these voluntary species to Jägarförbundet. We've also been looking at trust and technical equipment, how that is dealt with. And when it comes to motivation, it becomes very clear from our data that the most important motivational factor for these hunters to report these species to Jägarförbundet is what in psychology is called intrinsic motivation. That is sort of, you can say, motivation from the inside. So it's about the feeling that it's valuable to report, that it's fun, and that I am contributing to something important to me. And that I'm being a good hunter by doing this. We do see that also what you could see as the opposite and the extrinsic motivation, or motivation that comes from the outside, plays some role as well. And that is when you feel, for example, expectations that could be from other hunters or from the association or maybe from society in general. Or feelings or guilt, or that you want to avoid guilt, you want to avoid being a bad hunter or something like that. And it's more pressure from the outside to do this. And then we have also had some answers from hunters who say that they choose not to report these species. And when they motivate that, they talk about that it feels pointless. They don't see the point of doing it. And they can also refer to that it takes too much time, or it's too cumbersome to do it in the system where they have to put in the data in the form. When it comes to trust, we can see that the trust is reported to be high for this Hunters Association and also for other members of the hunting team, and a little bit lower, moving towards neither nor answer when it comes to authorities that are involved in wildlife management in Sweden. And concerning technical equipment, we were wondering a little bit on how they deal with that and what support hunters would like to have with this, because we know that that is something, as you can see in the motivation, you might not choose not to report, and they often claim that this is because it is a bit tricky with the technicality, so to speak. But the answers that we get seem to indicate that there's actually really a lot of trial and error going on. It's not a lot of reading manuals or calling for support. You do try to solve it yourself, and usually they manage to do that. We also asked a bit about a new application from Viltdata, from the hunting association that they call Viltdata, which they seem to be very positive about, even if this is entirely new technology that has been introduced. And with that, you may change slide, René. And I will not stay with this too long. This is our last slide, but I just wanted to show you this. This is the thematic analysis of one of our free text questions. And the question was, if you are allowed to speculate, what do you think can increase and decrease reporting? So the previous slide, that was answer to multiple choice questions. And here they could speculate freely and write anything about what it was. And the thematic analysis showed us that they talk mainly about 5 different themes here. So what seems to play a big role is how the data is used, what purpose it is to gather it, and how it's being used. And we think that this connects back to this intrinsic motivation, that it strengthens this feeling that it's valuable to report. They also talk quite a lot about the technology, that it needs to improve, and so on. Also about information and knowledge, and that can be also both about the technology, but also that other needs to know that this is important, so knowledge about this purpose. And then it is quite interesting to note that they talk way more when they suggest ways of increasing reporting. They talk quite a lot about these extrinsic or outer motivational factors, such as carrots and stick, rewards and punishments. So this is a mismatch then about what they report themselves to be motivated from, and what they think that would motivate others to report more. And this might be because it is a bit easier also to speculate on rewards and punishment rather than to imagine what would make reporting feel more valuable to people, or how can we make people feel that this is important. And with that, I will stop. I think there's a last thank you slide. Yes. So René, I and the Fox says thank you very much for listening.